Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brandy Bennett, and I am the Senior Counsel for Global Data Privacy at a company called Legends. We're a company that shockingly few people have heard of, but we operate in partnership with Live Nation, the Yankees, the Cowboys, and other. SoFi Stadium is one of ours as well, with the Rams and the Chargers. Over 100 different venues. We also operate global e-commerce, and we have under management probably 500 of the biggest sports and entertainment franchises in the world with respect to either physical retail, venues, or e-commerce in the world. So very, very, very busy in my world. Whitney, I'll toss it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Good morning for those in the US. Good evening for those in Europe and the Middle East. Excuse me, it's very early here. It's 7:30 a.m. I head up privacy at Asana. I started my career at the Federal Trade Commission doing marketing and advertising investigations and some privacy and data security investigations. But now I'm in-house. I am really, really glad to hear. I'm really glad to be here to talk about no-code solutions to privacy problems. I'm very interested in solving and thinking through the interesting issues that are coming up daily for all of us about privacy.
Gal, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Great being here. So I'm Gal Ringel. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mine. I'm coming from a deep cybersecurity background, did that for 15 years. I look 12, but I'm 35. Mine was invented to really, power individuals to exercise their rights and manage their personal data online to, avoid digital risks. We really wanted to leverage our cybersecurity experience to help individuals finally. We learned and we grew quite fast, and we learned how on the way how companies are challenged with handling these privacy operations activities, and we were called to help companies as well. So I'm very excited to share my thoughts from the market and what we are hearing from both consumers and companies while trying to create that privacy experience between the two. So I'm excited to share a lot of the findings that we're seeing in the market.
Yeah, definitely excited to have everybody here. So our panel today is talking about, no-code, automated and easy to implement solutions. I think some of the themes I've been, sitting in a couple of the other presentations over the last 24 hours here at TROPT, and some of the things there's these themes emerging about. We're all having some very, very similar problems. We're all having challenges in terms of data mapping, DSARs, integration with systems. I keep hearing the word interoperability a lot. And so I guess, let me throw it over to you, Whitney. What are you seeing in terms of, the challenges on your end and how you're managing this from your perspective, and how no-code and low-code solutions really can help you do your job better?
Yeah, thank you. So I've done data mapping as an exercise, either with a team or completely on my own, over 3 organizations now since GDPR, came into effect. And I can tell you, and I'm sure many of you are all aware, folks buy into the idea of a data map very, very quickly. They're very excited about it often until they have to start listing out and filling out your questionnaire or doing what you need them to do, attending the interviews, walking through every system. And the reality is because it's laborious, it takes a lot of time. And on top of that, data mapping for a lot of folks is very manual. It's based on human knowledge. You're basically trying to pull out who's the person sitting who worked on a system like 6 years ago that maybe no one's touched for a while. Anyone know what data's on that system? Can you please write it down to the extent possible? And so that is definitely one of the biggest challenges with data mapping. And so, some no-code solutions that I've looked at, to implement to help make data mapping a lot easier is just building it into vendor onboarding. And I know that sounds like oh, well, that's obvious, or, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But, we do at Asana a lot of our own, we use a lot of our own tools. So we leverage Asana for our DSARs. We leverage Asana for our vendor onboarding. We leverage Asana for our data map, which may not surprise a lot of folks, but, or may surprise a lot of folks. But our vendor onboarding, we've set up rules so that it automatically adds new vendors to the data map as it goes through the vendor onboarding process. This little bit of manual entry work for the person doing the vendor onboarding to add some additional color and details about maybe privacy risk or something we want to note, or whatever it might be. And so that really, just adding that additional step, makes it so that we don't have to go back to those system owners in a year and say, hey, it's that data mapping exercise again. Time to start talking about what vendors you're using as part of that data mapping exercise.
Yeah, I definitely hear you on the challenges of data mapping. I've now done it 4 times, I think. And the first time I did it was Excel, even pre-survey tools, kind of the privacy tech 1.0 stuff that you see out there. And now, I think having gone through that experience, as I kind of tell people, never again, never, ever, ever again would I want to do that. It is so painful. A lot of this work is so foundational to what we do because we can't make the decisions until we have the data maps. But if you've got to go through the process of doing a manual data map in Excel, it's excruciating. I kind of jokingly call it spelunking, or digging into your car engine. But, and it doesn't make you popular with anybody in your company, and it doesn't make you popular with anybody on your, team, your marketing or your engineering teams to be going line by line through databases and tables. I've been looking for, more, holistic solutions, and the no-code solutions that are emerging here in privacy tech are really exciting right now, because a lot of this stuff, depending on what the vendors have done, and there are some good vendors that have made some really good available APIs out there, allowing you to integrate with those particular solutions, into your data mapping technologies really kind of speeds up part of the process. I'm a firm believer that, automating your data mapping, automating your privacy compliance fully is a myth. I don't think there's any fully automated solutions out there, and I don't think there ever will be. I think it's all hybrid, in terms of, you can't automate context. You can't automate the human side of it, but you can automate things like data discovery, and you can automate workflows and, ticketing and assignments. And so, if, where you find and you target and you look at the items in the process that you can automate, that's where I start to get really excited, because it's, I am the only person in the room usually whose job it is to be 100% about privacy, and everybody else has other motivations that they have to do. I don't know, Gal, I wanted to, kind of give you the opportunity here. What are you seeing at Mine? What are you seeing, with the companies that you talk to?
So I'd like to comment on the data mapping and to give some background that I'm coming from the security side. And if you take us 5 years ago, I think no one in the security space would ever think that you can automate security operations, right? For the same reason that you mentioned, it's very hard to understand context, right? So if you have Splunk and all kind of different data lakes, and you have a lot of logs flowing in from different systems, how can you know that you have an intrusion within your enterprise perimeter? And guess what? Fast forward to today, most of the successful security companies are doing security automations for the exact type of context-related work. So I'm not saying it's easy, but it's definitely feasible. And specifically regarding data mapping, after we interviewed more than 1,000 companies before we decided to develop our own data mapping for companies, and we saw the exact same problems that you both shared. So the majority of the market is doing data mapping by using spreadsheets, right? They're doing that once a year, maybe twice a year. And the problem is exactly what you mentioned, is the human memory, right? They have to be the annoying person in the company that run after people to fill their parts, the VP of marketing, the VP R&D, the VP of sales, all kind of different person within the company, and it takes a lot of time. It's very hard. Now, recently, there is some new tools that allows to do some sort of automation, either from the identity sources like your Okta, your SSO, or things like that. And other solutions are going after the procurement or the finance area. Now, the problems with these two areas when you do either identity or procurement is that it only uncovers between 20 to 30% of the real data sources that you have within your company, because it's only the things that are managed. And what do I mean by that? Not all the third parties are connected to Okta. And the same manner, not all of the third parties are paid through procurement, right? Because different teams have their own budget and they can do whatever they want. So the long tail within the organization can be really scary, or let's call it the shadow IT, right? To find really all the places that have data. So once we understood that, we thought, hey, maybe we can take a different approach. And what we brought to the market, essentially, we took our consumer technology and the same way that we build digital footprint through individuals' emails, we took the same concept to the workspace. And today, our ability to do data mapping is by crawling in a non-intrusive way, and I can explain that later on, crawling within the employees' emails, only looking at the email subject lines and email metadata, and we're doing that in memory. We never read the content of the emails. We are able to uncover almost 90% of the data sources that companies are interacting with. So we are identifying like welcome to whatever, reset password, any kind of transactional email that are related to third party. And that works really well. I mean, in a few minutes, we are able to map the entire organization and to replace these spreadsheets. Now, the next challenge, and this is very hard challenge, which is not yet solved, is once you know the map and you know the different data sources, you need to do PII tracing, right? You need to dig into each one of them and see what's in there. So the structured data, like third parties that are more structured, are easier because they have a structured API, they save the data in a structured manner. But when you go to places that are unstructured, like let's search PII within emails, let's search PII within Dropbox, within Word documents, how do you do that? This is the hard part. So I would divide data mapping into one, building that initial map, which is very hard and painful today. And then once you do know where to look, how do you go inside each place and really find the right data that is relevant for either DSR handling or any other privacy operation? So this is our insight regarding data mapping. And yeah, it's very challenging, even after COVID-19, where we all work from home, and a lot of companies went through a massive digitalization, right? So the amount of new third parties that entered our organization is crazy. So how you manage that, right? If before COVID-19 we had dozens of SaaS, today we have hundreds.
Yeah, one of the huge challenges that I have in doing any of these exercises, so I've got a multinational company, and this is not my first go around with one of those, where I have an asset footprint, a technology, a systems, a solutions footprint that is, in the thousands. I have thousands of systems, not hundreds of systems. I have right now in different countries, I have different venues, and each venue operates its own different solutions. Example, hey, SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, which is one of ours. We're one of the major providers down there. They do a partnership with somebody, and all of a sudden we've got to implement their solution. And we're the ones now left holding the bag on that data mapping and that integration. But we have that same situation across the board with 100 different venues. So it's not like I have 5 payment solutions. I have 50 payment solutions. And so, for me, anytime I do a data map, it's going to be out of date almost instantaneously. Another theme I've heard repeatedly here with these manual processes. And so getting to the point where there is new technologies that can detect additions to the network, that can, automatically integrate or can integrate with no code. I don't have a full engineering team behind me. I have an IT team. I have some dedicated engineering teams at some different business units, depending on, like our e-commerce group has a dedicated team. But, by and large, I don't have those resources. And so when I look at tools, I need to find tools that can integrate out of the box very, very easily without having, to go out and hire an engineer to create those. And, one of the things that's really been important to me in the evaluation process for these tools has been the ability of companies to say, not only will we have all of these ones out of the box, and they hit my big ones, my big data stores, but they also are willing to build build the API connections so that they can connect with proprietary systems or systems that aren't in their library already. And that human element of having a partnership with your vendor who's going to work with you and is going to build what you need, I think is really critical, because I have a footprint that is just kind of out of control. And that's even before we start thinking about, about M&A.
One thing I'd like to add, and I think data mapping is a great example because we'd all love to automate that one away first. Like, just frankly, some people may have some other ones that they would love to automate first, but data mapping is often the one that comes to mind. So as Gal was speaking, I was thinking, what are the processes for data mapping that you need to think about? And this, when you think about no code solution or automating, often you're thinking, well, how do I fix this process so I can automate it and walk away? And the reality is that's just not going to happen in privacy. It's always going to be imperfect. We have to be okay with it not being a perfect system map. And I think we also struggle with our stakeholders to sometimes communicate that and say, hey, you know what, you're right, it's not going to be perfect. But the reality is it's impossible to make it perfect because we're talking about general governance here, system governance, data governance, that just generally cannot be done right to that context. So I was thinking about this, and it sounds like, there are 4 major parts to data mapping, each which might have a different no-code solution or might have a different automation that you can apply to it. You have the system discovery. That we're looking at maybe there are, Gal, your tool is like actually figuring out what systems exist out there from a vendor perspective to discover where they are. Then you have the data discovery solutions. These tend to be, I haven't seen many no-code solutions out there, but they're, most of these are leveraging APIs, better understanding the data out there to say, well, what is PII, what is not, what is personal data? And then you're going to the context. You need to say, okay, we found this system with this data in it. Who owns it? What's the legal basis for processing? What's going on here? And then you have to govern it. You have to decide, is it a high risk? Is it a high priority? Does security need to know about it? Should your IT team be putting it behind a service like Okta in order to kind of better manage it? And I think if you kind of break it down, you can find that even if you can't automate the whole end-to-end process, you can find the things that are going to be really painful, which is that data discovery and that system discovery, because we rather know about more than less. And so I was thinking about that, and that I just wanted to call out.
No, great points. I wanted to emphasize as well that if, I wanted to ask you back, among the 4 parts that you mentioned, what do you think the most, challenge part? And but I wanted to ask something else. You mentioned that you want to know more. So I had a few interesting calls last week with a few companies that I showed them that, systems scanning, system visibility. And then they told me that it's like opening a Pandora box. They don't want to know, because when you go to your 3rd and 4th point, right, after you discovered these systems and you need to do the PII tracing and the data, now you need to decide to govern, right, and to decide what to do with that. So it implies a lot of new things that you need to do within the company that touches so many different departments. So it's funny because on the one hand, I'm hearing like, I don't want to know, but on the other hand, I'm hearing, I don't want to have the risk of getting a fine, right? Or not knowing where is my data and miss something. So how do you manage that balance?
I think that's a really great question. So I think the context is the hardest, and that's where, an automated, system is going to be helpful. For how we're building it at Asana is using workflows in Asana. Frankly, we are looking at how can we create iterated like tasks for folks to review a system and give additional context as needed, so they don't need to be chased by somebody else. I do think that a map is never going to be perfect in its first step. And so a lot of processes, as you're building them within a privacy team, especially if you're doing it for the very first time, it's not going to be perfect. And I get the, if I know about it now, I have to do something about it thing. But the reality is that's true. But you can also look at the context of that system and say, well, this is low risk, lower priority. I need to do X, Y, and Z first. And I could go on a whole long rant separately of this, of, one person privacy teams solving all of GDPR and what comes with it. But that's out of context. But I think this is where, even if you do find it, don't panic. Look at it, get as much context as you can, slot it into your processes, and like move on and handle it, as needed, as it makes sense.
I think that's a really, you made a couple of really important points there. I do think, to kind of step back, there is a bunch of, I think you can automate systems discovery. I think you can automate data discovery to a decent, you're not going to get everything, but you're going to get a significant event, and you should know where the bulk of your customer data is stored. It's the unstructured data that is the hard stuff. It's the shadow IT, as we talked about before. That's hard. And so I think you have to, when you make, your decisions on these data mapping exercises, and you have to be ruthlessly pragmatic. And ruthlessly efficient. And you make decisions about where your biggest risks are, and you move on, because you can go down the rabbit hole, and you can keep going down the rabbit hole, and you can go down layer upon layer upon layer until you're down in the depths of the code. That's why I call it spelunking, right? At some point, you've gone far enough to mitigate, a good chunk of the risk, and you've got to go mitigate risks elsewhere. And the theme that I keep hearing here at this conference, one of the other themes is a lot of one man bands, one person shows. We're all trying, we are all immensely understaffed, I think, in most of these functions, and we are all trying to manage GDPR and CCPA and CPRA and Virginia CDPA and Canada and China, and if you're operating a global business, you're kind of ping-ponging around, and you don't have time to dive in and just do this one function. And so that's where I think these solutions that can help automate and do it in a no-code, low-code way are really, really important for us, so that we can literally move on to the other parts of our job. Because we've been sitting here for 40 minutes now, 30 minutes now, just talking about data mapping. That is one fundamental problem that helps us solve other problems, but we've got to go turn around, and I've got to go talk to, literally, I've got to go turn around and talk about building OAuth solutions and integrating with third-party SSOs for our partners, or I got to go talk about facial recognition and how everybody wants to do a facial recognition technology at this one venue. Don't even start me on some of that stuff. But we don't have, all of the resources and the time to just dig in on this one problem. And so that's where our tools and our vendors and our partners need to come and help us, frankly, bail us out of this problem, right? Help us sink, or swim, so that we can swim to the next problem.
The other one I wanted to kind of dig into is DSARs and management of them on the back end. I think that's one where, you often have a lot of manual processes because the vendor or the system that's processing personal data that's subject to that DSAR doesn't either have an API, it doesn't integrate. So even if you do have a no-code solution, how do you work through that? It's really interesting. We've been thinking a lot about this internally, and the privacy operations team at Asana, we do our DSARs in Asana, we manage them, we have tasks. We started implementing some workflow rules, and our head of user operations that manages our privacy DSARs like intake said that like one change in a workflow rule saved him 56 clicks. And I thought that was like really, really, really important to show that like as you think through even small improvements, like small workflow improvements, any sort of automation that you can do that doesn't require code is going to save you as you scale, right? Even if you are only getting 4 to 5 DSARs a month or even a week, if you're thinking, oh, my company was just mentioned on the front page of Reddit, and now all of a sudden that 5 turned to 1,000. How can you scale that? Those small incremental 1% improvements are going to make a really big difference. And so this is another place that I really like and think there are a lot of opportunities out there to implement no code, easy to implement solutions, automated ones. And I think, it shouldn't just be one person manually out there trying to do it alone. And I haven't really used many other tools out there, but even just email automated response rules could save you some time in that problem.
I'm jealous of you being able to have a case study where you show you saved 56 clicks down to 1, because that's the kind of stuff that helps you gain credibility when you're rolling out these solutions. So I'm going to have to follow up with you, Whitney, and pick your brain.
That's what he said, and I was just like, this is fantastic. And I'm hoping we get to talk about it a bit more in the future. But I really do think that there's a lot of opportunity there for all of the no-code solutions, even if it's not end to end. Don't shake it off. That 1% or even 5% improvement is going to make a difference if you stack them on top one of another.
Yeah, for sure. The funny thing too is, every time I do this data mapping, I think you've said you've done it 3 times. I've done it 4 times. Not to be competitive or anything, but like at all these different, I move around a lot of companies. But like every single time I do this, it's a different challenge. It's like doing it again, brand new, because the company is different, the data is different, the rules are changing, the tools are changing. And so in some ways, like you're bringing this prior experience to the table, and you're just like, oh God, never again on the Excel. And you have some rules and frameworks, but it really is a new exercise every single time that you have to do it. One of the kind of pivoting back to the no code stuff, one of the things that I kind of live in fear of is, you go through the exercise, you revamp your privacy policies, you've got your consents and your permissions figured out on the front end, and then you move on to the next business. And on the back end, your engineering teams, your marketing teams have decided, oh, hey, now I'm going to collect precise geolocation data, even though we agreed not to do that. And they change the data profile, right? They change on the back end what they're collecting from the users, and you don't know about it. Like a lot of things don't always matriculate up to the legal and the privacy department. They've gone, and again, you're one person, they've gone on the ground. And so looking for solutions that can detect those changes, because communication breaks down, are, things that are really pivotal to me in the future for mitigating risk. Looking at, and I've had this happen to me so many times where they say, we're not doing it, we're not doing it, we're not doing it. Great, lock it in, put our privacy policies out there, and then literally 3 months later, we're doing it. And they never told you. And so in some ways, looking at these tools, they can be solutions to help you manage human nature, help you manage the speed of your business and the speed of evolution. And that, again, going back to no code automation, can you detect those changes in your infrastructure, that new data is being collected? Can you detect that there's a new system integrated? All of this is something that I think we all struggle to try to find solutions for.
Gail,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear how your system works in keeping things up to date. I imagine you're getting some sort of update or regular notice like, hey, 6 employees have onboarded 6 new shadow IT systems. And I imagine IT leaders are pretty excited to probably hear the updates that you kind of do with your tool.
Yes, so not only IT leaders, one of the recent things that we built on top of data mapping, we try to produce use cases to solve specific problems on top of data mapping. So something really nice that we solved recently is the creation of ROPA report. So when you think about the GDPR, right? So when you go to Article 30, you need to maintain a ROPA report, which is right, a nice map of all the record of processing activities. Now, when you have that spreadsheet, obviously you can use it, but as we said earlier, it's not up to date. So since we have that automated in real-time systems discovery, and we keep that up to date almost on real-time basis, within a click of a button, you can always export your ROPA report and like show it in real time. Now, something that you mentioned that is very interesting. I'm going back to the DSR handling for a minute. So we also try to solve that piece, and I want to return the question to you because this is something that I hear in the market that we are trying to lead. So today, when we think about DSR handling, the first thing we did is to go and implement all the APIs that we could. So we thought about the 400, 500 popular third parties. We went and implemented their API, and now with the click of a button, we can trigger almost whether it's data erasure or data access request, fetch the data, prepare it, send it to the user, or even delete or anonymize. So for us, that was the easy part. Now you mentioned what happened with third parties that don't have an API. So last week, we started to work with a huge e-commerce customer that uses FedEx and UPS and all kind of, delivery capabilities. And obviously, FedEx don't have any API, right, to automate GDPR or CCPA requests. So what we did there in order to also solve the manual work around third parties is to automate an email deletion. So today, when the customer build the workflow of third parties, he can choose whether he wants to use an API integration or an email integration. And when a third party doesn't have any API, our portal then generates an email to the privacy team of that company and also track the response. So essentially, we are able to drive a process of deletion or data access request all through emails without any API. Now, the question that I want to refer back to both of you regarding DSR handling is what we see today is companies are saying, hey, if I invested a lot of efforts into implementing a no-code and automated DSR handling for GDPR, why should I need to create a different workflow for CCPA? So companies are starting to go out with, let's call it a golden rule, right? They're saying, hey, I already invested in GDPR, and let's imagine for a minute the GDPR, right, is the most strict privacy regulation. Maybe the German edition is a bit more, but let's. So they're saying if I already support GDPR, I can just honor privacy requests to any geo that reach out, and the only thing that I need to do is to exclude the specific exceptions where I can't delete data. For example, invoices or purchases or things like that. So I wanted to hear your thoughts about creating that golden rule instead of complicated things and creating a different workflow for each privacy regulation, because that really complicates the process.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a couple things you have to think about in terms of creating quote unquote golden rules. One, as we see fragmentation in the law, we see more and more privacy laws. The U.S. is, 30 some states introduced privacy law last year. 2 of them passed. legislative session is back open and more of them are coming up again, right? The US is fragmenting, and we see a wave of global adoption of GDPR or GDPR-like laws. So we are seeing fragmentation, but the devil is always in the details on these laws. And the example I like to give is for DSARs at least, is LGPD in Brazil is what, 15-day turnaround, whereas you have a 30-day turnaround under GDPR and a 45 under CCPA, or it's something like that, right? Like you have different timelines. And so, I am not necessarily going to put the burden on my team for a partially automated process to do that in 15 days for all of them. So setting the baseline at LGPD at 15 days is frankly impossible.
But if it's automated,
but again, there's no perfect automation. Not every system in your DSAR stack is going to be automated. There's always going to be some kind of hybrid approach. You can automate the ticketing, but usually somebody has to go pull data out of some system or another. And that's just reality on the ground. I can automate these 10 systems, but these 2 over here can't be. So I can't, say, oh, you got to do these 2 systems in 15 days. So I do have to make some sort of risk-based assessment. And this is where we pay really close attention to, what are people, what are people actually seeing on the ground in terms of, activity around regulation, around enforcement. And sometimes we take some risks. I do think we have to get beyond playing whack-a-mole with the law. So I do take your point about the golden rule. I build to 2 standards at this point, which is GDPR and CCPA. I look for commonalities across the laws where we're starting to see, some convergence around definitions, around individual rights. There are some commonalities that are emerging. But as always, the devil is in the details. So it gets really, really hard to navigate all that. And you have to make some risk decisions in your infrastructure and your processes as you build. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Whitney.
Oh yeah, on the other side of the coin, I'm a big golden rule believer, follower, which is, you can have small, right? Timelines are different, right? And I think you should always track where the request is coming from, what country. I think it's going to help for data analytics. And we could I would more automated no-code solutions on data analytics, please, for privacy-related systems and features. So if you're building that no-code solution to everyone out there, please, I would love automated reporting on analytics and metrics, because that's going to really help stakeholders understand, the change, the volume, and how things are working. So always track where your requests are coming from. I think it's really important. Separately, even if you're like, I'm just going to do the places where I'm subject to. What has happened in the world is that a lot of people believe they have privacy rights that legally they do not. Mm-hmm. And it is and as a privacy person, I want to give them those rights if I can. But they are going to be upset. They're going to be frustrated. They're not going to like your company. They're going to feel like you are not giving them something they deserve. And that is going to take up more time and resources than probably fulfilling the request. And so if you think about just approaching it from a more global perspective, you then don't have to also worry as much when a new state or country adds a data subject rights law, right? Yeah. It's Singapore has one. And so as you go into this approach, your delta of what you now have to worry about from a implementation perspective is much, much narrower. I also think from a no code solution perspective, even if you're tracking where it's coming from, you're going to have exception handling if you're not going to be thinking about that golden rule. And that's part of it too, is it's going to be so much easier to implement a no code solution, to automate it if you're treating every request coming in very similarly. And that's to say, as you automate, it's going to reduce the amount of time you're going to have to take. And maybe 15 days is much more reasonable. Or you could stack rank them and say, okay, if they're coming from, Brazil, they need to be within 15 days, California 45, and the rest of the world we're going to treat on a 30-day timeline. Or if there are too many requests to be handled, let's handle the ones that are, you have legal obligations to from an automated perspective, and then get to the ones after that. And hopefully creating some rules related to region are going to really make a difference.
You've hit on one of my pet peeves, which is people who made the decision and lawyers who give the advice not to extend CCPA or GDPR and just give privacy rights to their consumers. It is baffling to me that people are still giving this advice, that you're still seeing, hey, here's a California section, and if you live in California, you have these rights, and if you don't, sorry. Like, I don't want to have that conversation on the front page of Reddit or Twitter or with TechCrunch or any of these, any newspaper. I don't want to have that conversation. And I don't think my communications and my marketing people want to have that conversation. And yes, I have lost that battle at a company, at companies before in terms of extending the rights globally. I've also won that battle. And it really just depends on your leadership and the culture that you're building in terms of, how far you're going to extend those rights. But that is an argument that I use across the board, which is, you are often relying upon people who are not lawyers to make decisions for you and to automate or into action upon these items. And so you have to give them rules and you have to give them process to follow and, automate it as much as you can. And it is so much easier to have 1 or 2 standards than it is to have 1,000 standards. And that is the challenge that we find ourselves in with all of these new laws and regulations coming down the pipeline and all the fragmentation, is how do we distill all of it into a single set of rules, or maybe 2 sets of rules depending on region. That is an immense challenge, and it's a challenge that I will push back on the regulators and say, please start to consolidate, start to talk to each other, start to, use the same definitions, the same timelines, learn from each other what works and what doesn't.
I mean, the reality is, oh, sorry, go ahead, Gal.
No, I said very interesting. I really enjoy hearing your perspective as, coming from really large companies. And I guess, obviously, as the company gets larger to your sizes, the complexity gets very, unbelievable. And like, this is why I'm always trying to think within our no code and automated way. How can we consolidate things and to ease the process rather than creating another workflow and another workflow and another workflow, and then you literally can't find anything. And to keep it up to date with all the new changes, also making it very hard. And I also wanted to add something very interesting that I hear from the consumer side, and to raise it to the awareness why on the company side we do need to push for more no code and automated systems. So on the consumer side, we have more than 1 million users so far that used our product to send millions of deletion requests. Now we started to interview them. We already interviewed more than, I think, 25,000 people to learn how they think about the experience of activating their different rights. And what we discovered quite fast is that the majority of them is frustrated with the process because they feel that companies are moving the burden to them in order to complete the process. And I want to emphasize 2 things that I hear from them. One of the most popular answers that we heard during that survey is that when a company responds to the user for verifying his identity, usually companies ask for highly sensitive information, like please share your passport information. Now, these users essentially want to delete their data, right? So it's like it's a cat and mouse game. On the one hand, they want to delete their data, but on the other, and they don't want to provide additional sensitive information. But on the other hand, companies don't want to make mistakes, right? And delete data that they shouldn't really delete, and overcome phishing and all kind of other security problems. So this is like a problem that we're seeing, and this is why consumers, when they initiate either a deletion or data access request, they don't follow it because they don't want to provide extra information. this is something, this is one piece that we are hearing from a lot of consumers. And the other, which really surprised me, but when I speak with companies, I also understand their side, is when the user sends a deletion request. So it goes back to Brandy points that, regulators are not talking to each other and they didn't set, standards. So when I want to exercise my right to be forgotten, I need to send an email to the privacy team and say, hey, whatever company, I want to delete my data, period. That's it. Now, when users are saying that, the company responds and asks them, hey, user, are you activating your GDPR right or CCPA? Now, imagine the average user, right? He's not a legal person. And then he read these 4 acronyms, right? GDPR, CCPA, what is it? So they don't really know what does it mean. So they don't really follow, they don't keep that, they don't follow the process. Now then users are frustrated and companies are frustrated because each side wastes a lot of time on figure it out how to do that. So this is why something that we're trying to do with mine when we provide the DSR handling is a way to automatically provide the context from the user directly to the company, so the company can understand whether it's someone who signs to the newsletter, whether it's someone who made the purchase. We also provide the country, the state, a lot of different parameters that's supposed to cut that back and forth, right, that the company is doing with the user, even before searching the data within the company, right? Because we need to verify the user, we need to validate that request, and so these are 2 points that are here from that we hear from consumers. But yeah, I also understand the challenge from the company side to overcome it.
Well,
So
on that note, I think we can all agree that this is all a monstrous challenge that we are all swimming upstream on. I want to thank everybody for joining me on. I want to thank Whitney and Gal for joining me on the panel, and Lourdes and the Rise of Privacy Tech team for inviting us here. If anybody has any questions, feel free to follow up with me. I am perpetually, eternally online. And you can send me an email at bbennettesq@gmail.com, or you can find me at bbennettesq on Twitter. Whitney, Gal, if you guys want to drop some time.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And you're not at this alone. For those who are watching who feel very overwhelmed, you're not doing it alone. So thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.